wonder what you'll find with an open mind. You may be surprised. Yeah, gotta get away from this illusion for the sake of the world. This delusion, it's gotta go. Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of the Atheist Experience. I'm Matt Dillahunty. Joining me this week, Jen Peeples. We are live. It is Sunday, August 8th, 2010. Thank you all for tuning in. You can watch the show live and over the internet, something I realized that I've recently been forgetting to add to the announcements all the time. The information is available at the show's website, www.atheist-experience.com. There's information there on how to connect directly to the Ustream video that runs live in conjunction with the show, and there you can also find the archives. This is a live public access television program sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. You can find out more about the ACA by visiting the website, www.atheist-community.org. And if you do not get, we do take live calls, and we'll have the telephone number for you very shortly. If you don't get through on the telephone line today, you can email us at tv@atheist-community.org. That email goes to myself, the co-host, some of the people behind the scenes, and we can't possibly promise to answer all of them. There's a bunch of announcements about upcoming events and everything else, but to get the basics out of the way, in addition to sponsoring this program, the ACA also sponsors a supposedly bi-weekly audio internet-only podcast that's currently on hiatus called The Nonprofits. You can go to nonprofitsradio.com, that's P-R-O-P-H-E-T-S, and you can find out more about the show. We are waiting for me to complete my move, and so Dillahunty International Studios will shift slightly, but we'll stay, in the same place as far as the rest of you are concerned, and we should be having live shows back close to mid to late September. So we're looking forward to getting that back. In the meantime, some people have been kind enough to put up kind of rogue guerrilla episodes of the Nonprofits, and you can check them out just as you always could as both a podcast or at the Nonprofits website. The ACA has weekly meetings every Sunday at Romeo's on Barton Springs Road, beginning around 11:30, except for the first Sunday of the month when we host our lecture series at the Austin History Center located at the corner of 9th and Guadalupe. Next month's lecture will be Dr. James D., and after that, I don't actually have the list. I think it's Brian Batting and then Eileen Flynn. The big events coming up, though, in addition, we have Atheist Happy Hour every Thursday at the Dog and Duck Pub, beginning at around 7 o'clock. Upcoming events, our annual Bat Cruise. Austin has the largest metropolitan bat population on the planet, and we go out and get a boat, go downtown, bring along some drinks in no glass containers, and food and snacks, and have a get-together, talk, chat, get a chance to meet other atheists. We have people coming in from out of town as well. That's going to be September 25th, 2010, at 6 p.m. for the Bat Cruise. Before the Bat Cruise, though, I'll be giving a lecture on the superiority of secular morality. That's going to be at the Unitarian Universalist Church, beginning around 3 p.m. You can go to the website to find more information about all of these events and other events that the ACA does. More importantly, you can go to the website to register for the Bat Cruise. Registration's open. There is a limited amount of space on this boat. We couldn't book the infinite boat, so not everybody can come, but we can take. I think we're shooting for 125, maybe a little extra. Yeah. So you might want to go ahead and get your registrations in as soon as you can. Other events that are coming up: the Texas Free Thought Convention is taking place October 8th through 10th in Dallas. You can go to texasfreethoughtconvention.com for more information and to register for that event. It's going to be bigger this year and better this year, we all hope. And I'll be up there, Jen will be up there, there's some other ACA board members that are up there. We're going to probably, the plan right now is to take out the Nonprofits gear, do some audio interviews with the guest speakers that are up there, and show highlighted clips from the TV show, and give out pamphlets, information, and just say hi and have a good time with all the other free thinkers in the area. As I mentioned last week, Americans United for Separation of Church and State is having a couple events coming up. I still don't have specific details, but stay tuned and I'll get them when I can. And that is near the end of August, the Reverend Stephen Baines is going to come down to talk about how religious and non-religious people can communicate more effectively to avoid, the controversy to focus on the issues where we agree. And October 18th, which is a Monday, the Reverend Barry Lynn, the director of Americans United, will be in the Austin area, speaking at the same UU church venue that I'll be at for September 25th. So once you find it for mine, you'll be able to find it for his, and we can, do all these events together. And I think that's all of the announcements. I'm sure I missed something because it only took like 5 minutes, and normally it takes like 7 or 8. But
Oh, wow.
how you doing?
Good. I'm doing really good this week.
You're doing really good this week?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What are we talking about this week?
Well, before we get to my topic, which is Agnostic Delusions, wanted to mention that there was a federal court judge who ruled Prop 8 unconstitutional this week.
Oh, that doesn't matter.
That's like a watershed event
Yeah.
for marriage equality. And I'm still working my way through the decision. It's 136 pages or something, and so I'm not nearly there yet, but he's systematically dismantling the arguments against allowing gay people to marry. And I think this is going to go down as the Kitzmiller v. Dover decision of
Right.
the gay marriage argument. It's really huge.
Yeah, it may well do that. So it's at least a significant blow in the
Yeah.
equality front.
And some people have noted, Rachel Maddow was noting a few nights ago that the political right in this country has been largely silent on this issue. It's almost like they're looking at it like, wow, we can't use this anymore, which is amazing because that has been the sort of the motivator to get people to the polls, is make them scared of gay people and get everybody out there. But anyway, so yeah, huge decision this week. I actually happened to be in Washington, D.C. When I heard about it. So I heard about it several hours after the fact, and I haven't been this excited about a court ruling since Lawrence v. Texas.
Yep.
So it's really huge.
And I remember somebody posted it on my Facebook page, like immediately after the decision was,
Yeah.
released, and that was good. That was a good use of my wall. There are non-good uses of my wall, which will be deleted
Yeah.
As quickly as I can get to them. But
Yeah, I have the same non-good uses of my wall. Invitations to play games and things like, oh, please, come on.
we're giving away a free iPad to the. No, you're not. Not on my wall. You're not.
Yeah.
Unless you want to give it to me, in which case, I'll happily accept an iPad. All right. So, you read an article that I read.
Yeah.
And I have been. I've been addressing issues lately. By the way, just because we don't do this very often, and this is kind of what today's show is going to end up being about. One of the questions or some of the questions that we get relate to why on earth would you guys do this in the first place? What's the big deal about, if you guys don't believe, why would you have a talk show where you talk about what you don't believe? And it's because we don't just talk about what we don't believe. Atheists are people too. We are social animals like anybody else, and we enjoy getting together. The ACA, the Atheist Community of Austin, that sponsors this program, has as its major edicts from the Constitution, from the ACA's Constitution, is to support church-state separation and to promote and support the atheist community in the Austin area. We just like to go above and beyond, and so in addition to dealing with issues and talking to people in the Austin area, we're now broadcasting and have been broadcasting the show live to the world and answering calls and emails from all around the world. And it's partly educational, informational, and partly social. And what we find very often is that there continues to be confusion about what the various terms mean. I got an email or a message over Facebook just the other day by somebody who had no idea who we were and no idea what atheists were. We happened to post on somebody else's note, and then he sent me a private message, and he was like, "So, do atheists just not believe in God, or do they also not believe in these other gods?" And it was funny because in his mindset there was God and then other gods, and I was like, "Nope, don't believe in any of them." And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today as well.
Yeah, so this article that we both read is published in Slate magazine, And it was this guy, Ron Rosenbaum, who he calls it an Agnostic Manifesto. And the subtitle is, "At least we know what we don't know." And in this, he goes through a definition of agnosticism, and it becomes pretty clear in the very soon in the article that his main argument depends on an inaccurate definition of atheism, and he uses this to build up a straw man, which he then systematically, he thinks, demolishes with his
So in other words,
arguments.
he doesn't know what he doesn't know.
Exactly.
Good job.
And
Getting
it's
it wrong
actually
from the subtitle.
kind of humorous because he starts off by saying that agnosticism is not some kind of weak tea atheism. And I agree, they answer different questions. And we've talked about this many times. Atheism is about what you believe. Agnosticism is about what you know. And he goes on to say that agnosticism is radical skepticism, doubt in the possibility of certainty, opposition to the unwarranted certainties that atheism and theism offer. And so he's gone off the rails in the first paragraph here because atheism and theism do not entail any kind of certainties. You can find theists who are certain that they know that God exists, and they would be Gnostic theists. You can find a few atheists out there, I don't know very many, who would claim Gnostic atheism, and they are certain that they know God doesn't exist. And I think most people, both atheists and theists, will admit to some degree of uncertainty, at least if pressed. And I find that atheists are much more willing to admit some uncertainty than theists do. But he goes on to say that I believe it's important to define a distinct identity for agnosticism, to hold it apart from the certitudes of both theism and atheism. So again, he's not even understanding what these terms entail. There is no degree of certainty implied when you tell me that some God exists and I tell you that I don't believe because I don't find your evidence compelling. That isn't a claim of certainty in any sense. And he goes on to say that indeed agnostics see atheism as atheism, as much a faith-based creed as the most orthodox of the religious variety. And he says that atheists display a credulous and childlike faith, worship a certainty as yet unsupported by evidence, the certainty that they can or will be able to explain how and why the universe came into existence. And I have a note in my margin here, what utter bullshit. Because that's absolutely not what atheism entails. There's no faith, there's no creed, there's really no ism there. This is a rejection of a claim that some God exists, and that's all it is. It tells you what I don't believe, it doesn't tell you what I do believe. And his claim that this somehow means that we're worshiping science or that we have a certainty that we'll be able to explain how the universe came into existence, I'm perfectly willing to say that I don't know that we'll ever have an explanation for that, and I'm fine with that. But one of his questions that he keeps putting out there over and over again is, why is there something rather than nothing? And I actually find that to be kind of an absurd question, because first of all, it assumes that nothing is the default state. Maybe that is not the case. Then he claims that atheists have faith that science will tell us eventually. I don't have faith that science will tell us eventually. I have a justified belief that science is the very best method we've ever had of answering questions about how the world is. That's really the antithesis of faith. So he's got his terms all wrong, and he says that I just don't accept turning science into a new religion until it can show it has all the answers, which it hasn't and probably never will. And it's interesting because he's claiming that atheists require some kind of certainty, and then he's going on to assert that until science demonstrates that it has all the answers, in other words, until science demonstrates this certainty that he claims he doesn't need, He's just not going to put any of his faith in it. So I think that he's been quite inconsistent with his arguments here and betraying a complete misunderstanding of what these terms actually mean.
Yeah, and there's a lot of this. I think I'm going to have to kind of rehash and rework the lecture that I did on belief, which is available online to watch, because at the time things have changed in the dialogues that I have since I gave that lecture, and where I was focused on knowledge and certainty, and knowledge being a subset of belief, and the labels for agnostic and atheist being, potential subsets of each other when you're talking about theism. There is this idea, not only, as you point out, does he portray atheism as an absolute position, an absolute certainty, and as I've said many times on this show, outside of a handful of things, I reject that absolute certainty could be attained, or that it's particularly useful or relevant. Because by and large, when we talk about, I know something, you could sit there and nitpick and say, well, are you absolutely certain? And then they would say, no, I'm not absolutely certain. But what we really mean is we're as certain as we possibly could be. It would be worldview altering to find out that I'm wrong. And so if you're going to say that knowledge equals absolute certainty, then sure, you're correct on all counts. But the practical usage of knowledge does not convey anything having to do with absolute certainty. If anything, it's an acknowledgement that we're not absolutely certain, that we know, or I shouldn't use the word in describing it, that we believe something to such a high degree of certainty that we're willing to consider it knowledge, that it has been tested and stood the test to the best that we can, that it represents the best possible assessment of information that we can make, that it is the most reasonable, evidence-based supported position we currently have. And we acknowledge that, of course, we could be wrong. Now, on that level, I have said in that lecture that it may be fair to call me a Gnostic theist, that as long as you don't make atheist, I did it again, a Gnostic atheist, in that as long as you don't make a requirement that one be absolutely certain. There's a difference between I do not believe a God exists and I believe no gods exist. Those are two different propositions that tend to get equated and muddled up in this when you're talking about an atheist is somebody who says there is no God, absolutely. As long as you don't make a requirement of absolute certainty, and I don't, and by the way, I get to define myself, sorry, I can say I not only do not believe gods exist, I believe gods don't exist. And I believe this to almost a sufficient degree of certainty to qualify as knowledge when we're using it as a colloquialism.
Yes.
But I'm perfectly willing to be wrong, and I don't need to put myself in a position where I need to defend that or to assert that as a position, because there's a God exists. Have you met your burden for proof for that? And as long as that never happens, then I'm still fine and well supported in the I don't believe your claim. And I don't believe it because, as you pointed out, you haven't presented evidence for it.
Oh.
This knowledge and certainty thing, it gets to be a nightmare. And actually there's at least one caller waiting who addresses that.
Yes.
So I don't know if you want to hit the next part or take calls related to it or not.
Well, there's the next portion here kind of goes to what you're saying about knowledge and certainty. He makes the statement that he doesn't believe that there's evidence or falsifiable certitude that science can prove or disprove everything. And to that I would respond, who says it has to? Who has ever claimed that science can prove or disprove everything? This is another example of a straw man that he's building here so he can just knock it down. And at this point in the article, I was starting to wonder, is his beef with science or atheism? Because he seems to be conflating the two.
Not only that, there's confusion in like the level at which we're discussing this.
Yeah.
For example, he wants to go for an extremely rigid take on knowledge, that it's absolute certainty in order to make his point. And then he uses the loosest possible version for proof. Because if you want to go the kind of stringent down the line, this is what words mean and how they apply to disciplines, prove is not something that is relevant to science, mathematical proofs. And there you actually are dealing with absolute certainty. In science, what you come up with are models that describe the world and models that have withstood the tests and are consistently reliable. That becomes the scientific knowledge base, and it has nothing to do with absolute certainty. So on the one hand, he's using a rigid absolute certain, and then he turns around and uses a non-rigid, oh, well, science can't prove everything. Hey, science doesn't prove anything. If you're going to use absolute certainty, let's stick with it consistent.
Yes. And then he, let's see, before we get to calls here, just one more thing here. He talks about agnosticism doesn't fear uncertainty. It doesn't cling like a child in the dark to the dogmas of orthodox religion or atheism. And again, he doesn't understand that atheism is not, there's no dogma. There's no fixed set of beliefs that you have to have. So he completely builds a straw man of atheism so he can knock it down and claim superiority. And I think that's the whole point of this, is that he doesn't want to take a position one way or the other, admit what he believes or doesn't believe. He's misunderstood his terms, and now he's written an article that outlines the way he's allowed himself to feel superior to both theists and atheists.
Yeah.
So
I like the example that we talked about earlier, in which, and we can actually play this out, because part of this has to do with asking the right questions. And if you don't know to ask the right questions, you are not going to get the right answers, and you're definitely going to put yourself in a position where you can get stuff really wrong. So when he begins with, at least we know what we don't know, and then demonstrates that he doesn't actually know what he doesn't know,
right,
and the way he represents agnosticism. So you could ask me if I believe.
yeah.
Yeah. Do I believe a God exists? If I answer, or
If you say
if I say I don't know, I haven't answered your question.
Right.
Because she didn't ask me whether or not I knew a God exists or knew a God didn't exist. She asked what I believed about the proposition a God exists. And in that case, there's only two options. You either do believe it or you don't. And it doesn't matter if in your not believing that proposition how certain you are or what you know to be true or anything else. One question's about belief, and then the other question, the knowledge question, is about the degree to which you believe it, essentially.
Yeah.
Approaching and possibly never reaching absolute certainty. But.
Right. Yeah, and we actually got an email from a guy one time who wanted to sort of put atheism on a scale. And he says, well, maybe, you could quantify it in terms of, do you believe 30% or 50% or 70%? And, that determines, I guess, the strength of your atheist beliefs. And it's like I explained to him, it's not, to say that you 50% believe something is nonsense. Belief is binary. You either believe or you don't. Those are your only two choices. There is
Not only
no,
that, but he's framed it wrong too.
Yeah.
Because what he's really asking is, how certain are you of the proposition no gods exist? Which is entirely irrelevant, because what you should be asking is, based on the proposition some God exists, do you accept that? And if so, to what degree? Because if you don't accept that, it doesn't matter to what degree you don't accept it anymore.
Yeah.
That's where the burden of proof lies.
Yeah.
In this, I find it particularly funny because he does this whole layout of agnosticism is, it's the intellectual agnostic snobbery that I absolutely despise anyway. And then he takes Dawkins to task for being stringent and rigid and portraying his absolute certainty about God's existing.
Right.
And Dawkins himself has flatly said, even created a scale. And instead of going 1 to 10, I think he went 1 to 7 or something. And it's like, I'm about a 6 something, on this scale.
Yeah.
So he's flat, and it was in the God delusion. It's, I'm not stating with absolute certainty that no gods exist. So why is it that these people keep trying to portray it that way? What is it that they're really saying if instead of actually reading what people write and paying attention to what people do, we talked about it earlier. Look at the bus campaign in the UK. What did it say? There's probably no God, so stop worrying and get on with your life. Is that some stringent, absolute, certain, dogmatic belief? Nah, there's probably no God. And the various campaigns in the United States that have been up on billboards, don't believe in God, you're not alone. This has nothing at all about certainty, or dogma or anything else. It's a complete straw man representation of this. And the thing is, when you get to this position, when you get to the point where you're writing, I would expect people to have done their homework and made an attempt to understand the issues. And so either the person is inept in their research or their ability to communicate, or they are intentionally being deceptive in order to promote an agenda.
Yeah.
Or they're just stupid. Could be the case. They could have researched really well and just not quite come to grips with it. But.
Yeah, and he does, I mean, he quotes Huxley in here, so he's done some work on this. I think he's just not given this enough thought, or maybe he doesn't care.
It seems one-sided research, because how could you say Richard Dawkins is asserting a position of absolute certainty when I mean, it's right there. I'm about a 6 on a 1 to 7.
But you know, even in his article, he invokes this kind of emotional argument for it, and he talks about why has agnosticism fallen out of favor, and he goes on to say that new atheism offers the glamour of fraudulent rebelliousness.
Ooh.
So, yeah, we're just being rebellious. And he goes on to say that the willingness to say I don't know is less attention-getting, and yet that's what we say all the time when people call and ask us, hey, how did the universe start? Well, we don't know.
Don't know. Got some good scientific models that aren't exactly proof, but you know, make testable predictions, seem to be borne out by evidence, so we're going to accept this tentatively, like we do every other explanation, as the best current. I mean, how hard is this?
Yeah.
I have yet to meet anybody of this particular breed of intellectual agnostics. They are the least willing, in my experience, to actually acknowledge that they don't know, in an intellectually honest sense. They're happy to scream, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, and pretend like not having an absolute answer means we can't have any possible idea about, you know, I don't know why my bank account is $10 lower than I thought it was. You may be right. You may not know. You may not even have a good idea. But doesn't mean that we can't look at options and explanations. And if somebody A is explaining that leprechauns snuck into the bank at night and plucked credits out of your account using telepathy, and somebody else is saying you ate dinner somewhere and forgot about it, you don't pretend like we can't look at those two and come to a determination about which one is more likely to be correct.
Yeah.
So when we say that we have no idea, or well, actually, we don't know for certain, or even perhaps to an extremely high degree of certainty, how the universe came to be, or an explanation for why the universe is the way it is, don't pretend like we can't say there's probably some naturalistic explanation for this, and we've got some math that seems to be working, and compare that to there's a magical individual who exists outside of space and time who willed it into existence, and that's all we know about that individual, and not be able to determine which one of these is more likely. I mean, it's asinine. Yeah. And when I say I don't believe your fairies, pixies, gods, devils, demons, nonsense, that doesn't mean I'm saying you are absolutely wrong and I'm sure of it, or that you are a despicable liar and I'm certain of it, or anything like that. I'm saying you haven't met your burden of proof. And not only that, when we look at the situation in a broad spectrum, you've got a huge burden of proof to establish, because you're positing something that violates everything we know, to the extent that we know, about the universe.
And then when you compare that to the fMRI results, where believers, when asked, well, what does this magical being that exists outside of time and space want from you and everybody else, when you put them in an fMRI and ask them this question, the brain area that lights up is the same area that lights up when they think about what they want from people. Yeah. So it's just them making it up, or at least they think that they're channeling God or whatever, when in fact it's just what they think.
Yeah. In this case, you've got people who are so enamored with the idea of being open to possibilities that they misrepresent truly intellectually honest positions that properly consider where the burden of proof lies as some kind of strident, dogmatic, assertion, and that's not remotely what it is.
And then, his emotional argument becomes really transparent in this one statement where he talks about, I do like that agnosticism does have a sort of punk, disruptive, troublemaker side. So,
Isn't that what he accused us of wanting?
Yeah.
So instead of the new atheists, we're going to have like the punk agnostics?
Yeah, and so he does a lot about homonyms in there, and then he invokes Stalin. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I made a note. What? No Hitler? But he avoids doing that. So he didn't violate Godwin's law technically, but
Came pretty close.
anyway. So let's. Why don't we go ahead and take some calls then?
Sure. I've got. Is it John in Princeton?
Yeah, hi.
How you doing, John?
Hi.
I'm getting some feedback. I'm not sure why.
Okay.
I'm not either. Try.
Are you guys getting the feedback?
Have you turned? No, we're doing okay in here actually. If you turn down the stream and everything else, try and make the most of it.
I'm actually not watching live, so.
Okay, well, try and get your question out, and we'll see what we can do.
Okay, well, I've been a big fan of the show. It's actually been responsible for my own, partly responsible for my own deconversion from Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing on the show kind of stood out to me over the years, and it was, it seems like whenever somebody calls in regarding solipsism, whoever is the host seems to be really dismissive, not even seeming to actually address what they're claiming.
Sure.
And a specific example would be like there was a caller somewhat recently who was making some argument, and he mentioned that he was a solipsist.
Yep. And Jeff and I
so
at the
he hung
same.
up and said, "Well, why even bother calling if we're just figments of your imagination?"
Sure.
Well, I was just saying that I think it's irresponsible to misrepresent solipsism because what you do is you create a straw man that's similar to the straw man that people create for atheism.
Well, see, the thing is, solipsism takes a number of different forms. And one might divide it up into categories of implicit versus explicit solipsism. But in a simple sense, it starts off with the idea that we can't be certain that anything other than our own mind exists. Correct?
Right.
Who gives a damn? That's my position. As I just mentioned a minute ago, I don't care the slightest bit whether or not we can be absolutely certain. Solipsism may in fact turn out to be true. I may be a brain in a vat. I don't find these various hypothetical scenarios that kind of talk about solipsism to be useful or meaningful at all. Because the solipsist could be right. I might be the only mind that actually exists. However, until there's actually evidence to support this, I'm stuck actually acting in the reality that I perceive and operating according to its rules. Solipsism offers nothing that is practically useful, and it is just a pure speculation that is derived from a faulty appeal to absolute certainty. That because we can't be absolutely certain about something, therefore X.
Well, I mostly agree with you. I'm personally not a solipsist. I have my own reasons for rejecting the position.
Yeah.
Personally, I think that if we are in some kind of alternate reality, then the best way of interacting is still within our reality anyway. So it's true that.
Well, you said
it doesn't really matter ultimately.
You said if we are, and if solipsism is correct, it's not an if we are, it's if you are. If solipsism is correct, it's not if we are in an alternate reality, it's if you are in an alternate reality. I'm a figment of your imagination. If in fact,
it's not necessarily that way. I mean, some solipsists do believe that their imagination is the only thing that exists.
No, what I'm saying is that the solipsistic position begins with we cannot be certain of any other mind than our own.
Right.
And I'm saying that if that position is correct, if what they draw from that is correct, then it would naturally follow that I am a figment of your imagination and vice versa.
Sure.
Okay, that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that everybody who says they're a solipsist is asserting a position that they are in fact the only mind. I'm saying that solipsism begins with this, we can't be absolutely certain, or I can't be absolutely certain that there are any other minds than my own. I don't see that there's evidence for this proposition. It is a purely hypothetical speculation that offers no practical benefit. And so whether it's true or not until it's actually demonstrated to be true, it is entirely useless. And so I find the people who, and in the case, the specific call that you're talking about where Jeff and I both said, oh, you're a solipsist, and hung up, I was actually taking his claim of being a solipsist and putting it in the context of the larger arguments that he was making. So I don't think I was unfairly representing that. But I'll fairly represent solipsism anytime somebody wants to. It's a philosophical position that we cannot be absolutely certain that there's any other mind than our own. And that's all you have to say, because you can derive or not derive what you want from it. It serves no practical use, and I don't see that it's relevant to any conversations that we have, which is why I don't spend any time on it.
Well, you say that it's a philosophical position. Don't you kind of see it more as a rejection of a belief in the same vein that atheism might be?
No, it is an acknowledging something that is true, the inability to be absolutely certain of something, and it is developing, drawing from that a conclusion that therefore I cannot be absolutely certain about things. I can though, I think therefore I am, Descartes, I can be certain that I exist in some form, that my mind exists in some form. I cannot be certain that other minds exist because they could be figments of my imagination. It is a philosophical position.
But it's the rejection of the belief that other minds exist.
No, because that would be an assertion, and that would be specifically why I would make fun of people, because then they would be asserting that in fact they are the only mind, and that is a position that they would have to actually present evidence for. That's what hasn't been done.
But they don't, what I'm saying is they don't claim they're the only mind. They claim that they reject, at least in the position itself, it's rejection of the belief in other minds. If nobody's saying anything about whether there are other minds,
they don't believe in other minds. See,
right, so it's a disbelief.
Sure. They are rejecting a proposition that other minds exist. You could phrase it that way, but you'd be wrong. Because that is asserting that is the assertion of a position. I'm rejecting that other minds I'm rejecting the claim that other minds exist. That's not how solipsism is derived. I mean, you could do it that way. You could say, okay, you claim there are other minds, I reject that. Well, all right, all you're doing in that case is demonstrating that you are, as I pointed out at the beginning, uncertain as to whether or not other minds exist.
Well, we can look at default positions here. Is the default position to assume that other minds do exist, or to not assume that other minds exist?
Well, I would actually say that you've kind of jumped the gun, because I think one of the ways that we can go about determining what the default position is by observation. Now, I would say that by and large, the practical necessity and the evidence at hand demonstrates that it is most probable that there are in fact other minds. But now we're debating what's actually true, and not what one believes about what's actually true. All right, did you follow that?
So you're saying, I mean, I agree with you with regards to the philosophical practicability matter.
Sure.
I'm just saying that, to say that it's a statement of positive, it's a positive statement is kind of,
No.
it's construing it in the way that people might say, well, atheists, you know, believe in no God. Even if they admit that it's not an absolute position, it's still not a positive position.
Okay, there are two ways to phrase the solipsism, the way you're talking about. One is an assertion that I am the only mind. And the other one is a rejection of the proposition that there are other minds.
Okay.
Okay? If I assert that I am the only mind, I have a burden of proof. If I reject the proposition that there are other minds, I may or may not have a burden of proof, depending on, well, first of all, if I'm trying to convince anybody, I always have a burden of proof. But as far as where the default burden of proof lies, is it on do other minds exist, or does the default begin with only a mind exists? I think that's the wrong place to start the discussion of this, because until somebody first proposed the idea that we can't be certain that there are any other minds, the default certainly was that there were other minds. I mean, the practical default, the one that people actually use, correct?
Right. I mean, in the discussion,
The whole thing centers around...
You can say it's between two minds in order to be a discussion.
The whole thing centers around the idea that everything I experience could be an illusion and not real. The rejection of the claim that there are other minds is a rejection of obvious evidence to the contrary. And it is an assertion that everything I experience is not actually real, that it's all an illusion.
Well, I mean, whether it's real or not, I mean, the idea isn't that it's an illusion in the sense that there necessarily is something ultimate there. I mean, people with, say, a relativist view of the world might say that there is a reality, but it's, you know, relative in that sense.
I don't know. We're losing everybody else, I'm sure, John.
I'm sorry?
At this point, I'm sure that we've lost everybody who was actually watching the show.
Well, okay. I mean, I just wanted to point out, I mean, that sometimes I just think sometimes the show doesn't really, kind of assumes certain things about solipsism that may not be original to it.
I haven't assumed anything about solipsism. I didn't get my definitions wrong today when I was talking about it, did I?
Okay.
What you're talking about is when I offer my opinion about solipsism. And I think that people who waste a lot of, there's a key word, waste a lot of time focusing on solipsism, a completely impractical and useless philosophical position, are people that I don't want to waste any time on.
Well, you can critique it for being useless, but that's not usually what's said.
What do you mean that's not usually what?
I mean, what has been said in the past, as far as I've seen, isn't that solipsism is useless. It's usually that it doesn't provide evidence. That's what I have a problem with.
Okay, it doesn't. That's why it's useless. The solipsistic positions are useless because they cannot support the position that they're taking. The only way they can do it is to do what you're trying to do on their behalf, which is say that you have to prove to me that other minds exist, and until you do, I'm not going to change my position. Well, okay, now you're just pig-headed. I'm not saying you, John. I'm saying that individual that's holding that position until such time as they've changed. Yeah, you're going to have a burden of proof as long as you're having a conversation where you're trying to convince somebody's mind, but all the rest of us are dealing about things beginning after the issue of solipsism. There is some reality that I experience, and I'm fine with presuming as the default position that the reality I experience is actually reality. For one thing, it would mean that if I wasn't, the implications of this are that I have invented or been fed everything, actually, if I'm the only mind, I have invented all of this. If I'm the only mind that exists, I've invented all of this, which means I've come up with every beautiful song that's ever inspired me. I've come up with every hateful comment and thought that anybody has ever expressed. When I talk about it being practically useless, I'm talking about I experience some reality, and that becomes the default position. Until such time, it's like the Matrix. You may be in the Matrix, but until such time as somebody can demonstrate you're in the Matrix, you are justified in believing that you're in reality. That is the default position. Reality doesn't have a burden of proof to prove that it's actually real and not real. It's people who would reject that reality, and by the way, they're rejecting it for this nonsensical notion of absolute certainty. But we've already done like 15 minutes on solipsism, and I think we got to move on at this point.
Okay.
But thanks, John.
All right, thanks. Nice talking to you.
You too.
Thanks. So I was going to say this kind of demonstrates why it's a waste of time to talk about solipsism for very long.
You know, I mean, I agree. And I'll think more about that, and maybe John can email. You can always email tv@atheist-community.org, and maybe we'll get a chance to read them. And after the show's over, as a reminder, Everybody gets together for dinner at Threadgills at 301 West Riverside Drive. Any atheist or atheist-friendly person is welcome to come to that or any of our events. You don't have to be a member to attend. You don't have to be a solipsist to attend. And if you are, well, you know, we can talk. But we got Kel in Missoula.
Hey man, how you doing?
Good.
I'm getting after too, but I'll just continue on here. First, I want to thank you guys for allowing me to come out as an atheist.
There's a dial on the audio thing that's set wrong that's sending the stuff back to the guys on the phone.
Yeah. Are you getting feedback, Kel?
I can hear a lot of echoes. I can
Okay.
barely hear you. I can hear you guys, but it's echoing like crazy.
We'll shut up for a minute and let you talk, and hopefully it'll work out.
It just echoes. I can. All right.
Just talk without listening to yourself talk.
Again, I can just hear echoes. I can hear it's just strange. It's very
All right.
strange.
Then I got to drop it. I'm sorry. All right. So for the people who are calling in, there's audio problems in the studio today, and I apologize for that. It does make it difficult. I have called in when those are going on. There's a setting on the board that sometimes evidently gets overlooked, and nobody can remember exactly which one it is, and it may not even be that setting. The equipment's actually beyond our control. So when you call in, when you actually get on the air, here's some things to do. Make sure that your TV and or stream is turned down or off. When it comes time for you to present whatever it is that you're presenting, go ahead and, you know how you would normally hold a phone where you can talk and listen? Just hold the phone like this and talk and ignore whatever's coming out of the earpiece for a minute. Keep it brief. And when you see a response or when you've done saying what you've got to say, we'll talk and you can cover the mouthpiece and listen. Hopefully it'll solve some of the problems.
Yeah.
It's about all I can do. We got Luca in New York.
Hey, what's happening, guys?
Hey, how are you?
Hi.
I wanted to have a really long conversation about solipsism, if it's okay.
Why, certainly. Have you got a time machine?
Yeah.
No, kidding aside, I did have a point to make about Christianity, and I'm going to go ahead and do the thing where I cover my earpiece because I do hear a little bit of an echo.
Go for it.
So
Okay.
We'll need to interrupt me. I was thinking about the trend in history of Christianity. If we look at the average Christian today and the number of claims and commandments from the Bible that he accepts versus the ones that believe they're accepted by your average Christian 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, it's diminished so much. I mean, however terrifying it is that 40% of people in America believe that the Earth is 6,000 years old, it's not 100%. And people used to burn witches alive, and people used to actively believe in slavery, and the number of Bible claims has been reduced a lot over time. And the number of atheists has been growing, and if you look at your average Christian family, it's much more common that the children are slightly less pious and serious about the religion than their parents, as opposed to the other way around. So as long as these trends continue, don't you think that basically we've won the battle? That, there's been an oil spill and it takes a long time to clean it up. So basically, Christianity is destined to wind down, at least in Europe and America and the civilized world.
All right, I'm going to put you on hold so that we can try and kill the audio thing. We're not hanging up.
Okay. Yeah, I think actually John Loftus addressed this once on his blog, and I think Bart Ehrman has talked about it too, that basically Christianity has been forced to sort of evolve, or it would have died a long time ago, because if you look at, initially what the original, Catholic Church required of people, and then later after the Protestants got on the scene and everything, what was required of them. If you look at that, very few people would be willing to follow that. So I think that there's some evidence that it's had to evolve. And one of the things that you mentioned, slavery and some of the other issues, that the church has taken a different stance today than it had originally on those issues. And I use the church as sort of like this monolithic thing, which Christianity really isn't. But that's kind of another argument for Christianity as sort of an idea morphing itself to fit our changing view of how we relate to each other. And so I think that Christianity has been heavily influenced by secular morality and our secular notions of what's right and wrong. And it had to, because otherwise I think it would have died long ago.
Yeah, I mean, if we only look at the trends, not only what's actually trending now within the modern religions, the other trend is that all religions die.
Yeah.
And what tends to kill them off is their inability to be flexible. And as if you put out too rigid a pronouncement about the way the world is, and while science doesn't prove anything, when our knowledge gets to a point where your rigid declaration about how the world works is obviously wrong, your religion is going to die off or it's going to change. And what we see is that the older religions, actually, there's a little caveat here, in that some of the religions were incredibly flexible, but died off for other reasons. It's not the only thing that kills off a religion. Culture wars and clashes, and what do individual religions propose to offer to the adherents. I think that we're going to see this trend continue, and what we're going to end up with is some segment of the population is always going to believe something that everybody else would consider to be nonsense. To consider that we're going to have some segment of the population that's almost always going to be superstitious. And we see this because ritual exists outside of religion, and believing in supernatural things isn't necessarily constrained to religion. We see this in pseudoscientific beliefs and the various things that get labeled as woo. Eventually, I think you're going to kind of get. I think science and truth will always win out in the end, barring some catastrophe that eliminates them. But you'll end up with a huge section of the population who may not necessarily understand the real world at the level of the most elite with the scientific knowledge, but they're on board. They're focused on reality. They don't really have any concern or issue, and don't really believe the superstitious nonsense. And then the portion of the population that believes in the superstitious stuff will continue to decrease, but I don't think it will ever go away. And at least until we, perfect a brain that's immune from emotional pleas and logical fallacies, and then we're probably not human anymore.
Yeah.
But wouldn't you say that this introduction of this flexibility element to Christianity, and even just the fact that it's split into Catholicism and Protestants and whatnot, that in itself represents a very heavy blow to their monopoly over what people think.
Sure.
Yeah.
And if the trend continues, eventually it's going to just become so fragmented that it basically dissolves,
I think that's the case. I think that Christianity and Judaism and Scientology and Mormons and Protestants, Catholics of all stripes, that their religions will go the way of the dodo. The question that you had asked earlier was, have we won the war? And absolutely not. One of the key issues is when the rational, non-theistic members of society have gotten complacent and assumed that we've got this religion thing beaten, and tried to say, okay, let's just kind of, let them have their little delusions or whatever, they've put us in a position where there's a backlash. So you get religiosity tends to do this as it climbs for a while and then drops and then climbs for a while. Well, actually, I guess maybe it would be hopefully this way.
Trending down.
Trending down overall. I would
interrupt you. I can barely hear what I can hear what you're saying, but I can barely understand it because of this echo issue.
Sure.
So
Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and go, but before I do that, my point was this, that what validates Christian person's belief is the fact, or at least historically would have been, that everybody in the world believes the same thing as him.
I don't think that's true.
No.
I don't think that's true, and I don't think it's really ever been true.
Yeah.
I think it's been a common claim, and I'm going to let you go so you don't have to listen to the echo. I think it's been a common claim, you hear this, well, everybody believes this. I don't know that I ever met a Christian while I was a Christian. It certainly doesn't apply to me, who believed or took validation from the fact that others believed, at least not explicitly.
Right.
Implicitly, when you're running with the herd, that type of implicit validation, yeah, if that's what you meant, then I'm on board with that. But by and large, to say that, you know, everybody else has believed it, so I'm going to believe it too, I don't think that represents a significant portion. I think they've been convinced by something else.
You find that argument occasionally when you've got a theist who's obviously losing an argument, and they throw that out there as like, well, everybody else believes this. Are you saying all these other people are wrong?
Yep.
You know, and that's just an argument from popularity. So,
Sorry.
Anyway.
That was a redundant question, I guess. I didn't have to say yep. But
Anyway.
we'll try Kel again from Missoula.
Seconding again, I can hear you a little better, though.
Okay.
I do want to thank you, first off, again, for helping me come out as an atheist. That's the first thing.
Okay, great. Thank
Great.
you. We're glad.
And I've got a little story for you if you want to listen to it. It's kind of interesting.
Go
I
ahead.
kind of call myself a Gnostic atheist, Gnosticism being the thing that with some of the beliefs that have experiences, you know, that prove God. But I'm still an atheist. Several years ago when my son was born, I read a story in the paper about a man who took the son to work, who actually forgot him in the car, and the son died from heat exposure. The guy let his son die. He freaked me out. So I'm lying in bed that night, totally upset and very emotional. I could not get this out of my head. I was fearing that maybe I would do this to my son somehow. I'd make some horrible mistake to my son. As I lay there awake, I was kind of meditating. All of a sudden, I found myself in this giant castle-type, medieval-type place, and it was obvious I was the son of God. These people were 50 feet tall, dressed in wonderful raiment, all the whole 9 yards, you know, golden helmets, everything, like, you know, Viking. So, and I asked the question, how do I be a father? How do I, you know, do my job? And it wasn't in words, but they gave me this answer. And I woke up totally relieved. It was a transcendent, wonderful experience. It was absolutely fabulous. And it changed my life, and it helped me be a better father. But here's the thing. I've been an agnostic for years. Basically, I was really an atheist, truly, until you guys, watching you guys on YouTube, made me realize I was an atheist. Even though I've had that experience, and a lot of Christians would love to have, they went before God, so to speak, I still don't believe in God. Because it could be a dream. I mean, it probably was a very fancy dream. I've had out-of-the-body experiences, the same thing. Does not prove there's a God, or an afterlife for that matter. So I tend to cheat on myself a Gnostic atheist.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
I mean that I've had experiences that most people would, you know, assume that they would, you know, they've met God or whatever, but I don't buy it.
Okay, but do you understand the difference, or do you understand what that means when you say you're Gnostic or agnostic?
Yeah. And then for years, I thought I was an agnostic, and I still am an agnostic because I just don't know. But watching you guys on YouTube made me realize that I'm really an atheist because I don't believe in God. I don't believe in it. I still don't believe in Christianity anyway.
I'm just saying, like in the last minute, you've called yourself agnostic and a Gnostic theist. So I don't know which one you are. Atheist. Sorry.
Well,
yeah,
the Gnostic part is kind of tongue-in-cheek because I understand they believe they've actually had experience which prove God to them. I had the experiences. I just don't believe it. You know, it's not rational to believe in things like that. Just 'cause I had, you know.
Gnosticism or agnosticism is a claim of knowledge.
Right.
So are you making a claim of knowledge?
No, I'm just basically saying I had experiences which a lot of folks would probably claim as knowledge, or Christians would certainly claim as knowledge.
Okay, and what do you say about those experiences?
Again, you break up a bit. I have a question for Matt, and then I'm going to get off the line. And it goes to belief. It seems like a lot of Christians I've met say they believe in God. But I get the strong impression they really don't believe. And when people call up here your show, you know, the religious Christians, and they're very angry at you for having this show and being atheist. To me, it's like, several years ago, I found a website called the Flat Earth Society, Flat Earth Society. I thought it was kind of a comedy website, but when I went there, these guys are very serious about believing in a flat Earth.
Yeah.
They're not joking about that. They really believe there's a flat Earth. I just left. It was silly. And if I really believed in a God, I don't think I'd have a problem with atheists. I think they don't protest too much. And my question for Matt is this. You were a Christian for a very long time. Did you really believe in this stuff, or were you, like, trying to believe in it? You know what I'm saying?
Both at different times.
Well, because like when you were young, you really believed. When you got older, no.
No, there were periods of time when I was young and when I was older that I believed or, professed belief at different times. I mean, I don't doubt that these people who call it, I mean, the idea that somebody's protesting too much is, it's anecdotal, but by and large, I don't have any problem at all believing these people really believe this stuff, because I used to, and I know too many people who clearly do. Now, we can quibble about whether or not their actions actually match up to what they claim they believe. But I think that it's a complicated, the human mind and what you believe is a complicated landscape, and there are times in anybody's life where you believe things to greater and lesser degrees, and so I don't know that it has any.
Yeah, I'm perfectly willing to accept that they believe this, and part of it is because having been a believer myself at one point, I understand that it's possible to believe things for bad reasons. And that's essentially what happened with me. And when I discovered that those were bad reasons for belief, that kind of set me on a journey to discover, what was real. And, it ultimately led to my atheism. But, I think that they, for the most part, they do believe. And a lot of it is, Tracy's done a lot of shows on childhood indoctrination, and that's a really powerful thing. And we have people who write to us who are atheists who still have a fear of hell because that's been indoctrinated into them. Do they really believe there's a hell anymore? On an intellectual level, they don't. But there are some emotional ties to that belief that, people struggle with letting go. So, I think that for the most part, I'm willing to accept that believers actually do believe what they claim they believe.
Well, guys, thanks. I'm going to go because it's still echoing. But thank you so much for the show. And
All right.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right, David in Chicago.
Oh, hi, Mom.
You're on.
You're on.
Okay, cool. There's an echo, so I'm just going to ask my question and then just get off the air and let you guys answer it if that's all right.
Okay.
Great, thanks.
Okay, my question's for Gene, but Matt, if you want to get in here too, you can a little bit.
Who's Gene?
On the beginning of the show, you guys talked about the Proposition 8 in California.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard, I think it was like on Fox News or MSNBC that they were already expecting an appeal and it would most likely go to the Supreme Court. And obviously I know that what you guys would want to happen if it went to the Supreme Court, but what do you think what will happen if it goes to the Supreme Court?
Okay.
That's my question.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, David.
What I think will happen is that obviously it's going to the Ninth Circuit.
Yep.
And I think the Ninth Circuit will uphold the ruling because from what I've seen of it so far, it's legally sound. And I am not convinced that the Supreme Court is going to hear the case. So the Supreme Court may let the Ninth Circuit's ruling stand.
Yeah. I can't, I'm not a legal expert, no matter how much, First Amendment law I end up reading, it doesn't help, increase my credibility. I'm just a guy, so I'm giving you my best guess. I agree with Jen. I think the Ninth Circuit will uphold it. I don't think that the Supreme Court will touch it, but I think if they do, this is going to be one of the most interesting cases in the history of the world, because I don't see how they could possibly overturn it.
Yeah.
And and this is why I think they won't touch it, in order for them to touch it and uphold the Ninth Circuit Court, you're going to have some of the most conservative and conservatively praised justices on the Supreme Court. One of them is going to have to do something that comes unexpected to the base. It may, shockingly, as much as I despise him, it may actually be Scalia.
Yeah.
I haven't seen him talk too much about same-sex marriage, and it's one of the reasons why I suspect that might be. I could be way wrong. I could just be like optimistically dreaming here, but honestly, I don't think they'll touch it. I think the Ninth Circuit will uphold it and it'll stand.
And I do think it very much depends on how the Ninth Circuit words its ruling. Because if they, there's a couple of ways they can do this. They can say, okay, we're going to uphold this, but it only applies to California. Or they can say, yeah, we're going to uphold this, and it's unconstitutional, and it applies everywhere in the jurisdiction of the Ninth Circuit, which has much broader implications there. So, I think whether or not the Supreme Court takes it depends on how the Ninth Circuit words their ruling.
Yeah, I think the only possible exception, and I haven't read the whole decision, and I don't know what the Ninth Circuit's going to say, so this may have already been covered. I just don't know if it's been covered enough. They might try to do it as a states' rights issue, which muddies the playing field quite a bit, because you have this other issue of if you're married in one state, are you married in all states? And that's one of the reasons I think they won't touch it, but I don't know.
Yep.
Just wild-ass guesses about what the Supreme Court may or may not do. We got Steve in Austin. How are you?
Yeah, how y'all doing?
Good.
Got a few things to say, but let me set up a premise with you real quick, okay?
Sure. Are you getting an echo?
Pardon me?
Are you hearing an echo?
Yes, I am.
Okay. We'll shut up and try and let you get your stuff out, and then I'll put you on hold so that you don't get the echo anymore.
Okay. Say you were a son or a daughter, and your father went off to war, and you never met him because he got killed in battle, and all he left you was a letter. And it described what he wanted you to do with your life and how he wanted you to behave. But you never met the guy, and you don't even have a picture of him because, let's just say, your mother had to move and took you with, and all your belongings were left behind, for whatever reason.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, so hold this thought for a second. Now we have a Bible that has survived maybe 2,000 years of writings now. True, it's been translated into religious doctrines, and every religion has their own agenda. But nevertheless, you have an intent of what God wanted you to know about him in these words. Now, I've analyzed the Bible from the Jehovah's Witness position, from the Catholic position, and from the Jewish position, and many others. And here's where I'm getting to as far as what I told the screener about the atheist doctrine. And what a doctrine to me is, you take these words that have been written down, and let's say you're Jewish. Well, you can take those words and you can turn it into a doctrine that says there was no Jesus Christ. The New Testament is fake. There's not enough proof for Jesus, but there is enough proof for Moses, and there was Israel, but we don't agree with the New Testament. Now, they have an agenda, and they'll use the words and they'll change them, and they've got all kinds of doctrines written as to why the New Testament is false. But then you have the Jehovah's Witnesses, and they'll say, well, Jesus was not God. He was a God, and that Jesus and Satan are brothers, and they get all these people to go out and collect money for them, and they have their agenda. And so let's look at the atheists for a second. You all say you're not a religion, but you are preaching a doctrine that takes those words, and I know all your arguments. I've debated atheists for the last 5 years. The one that where Jesus said this generation shall see my return, and they didn't see his return. But if you analyze the words, I can tell you what that means. Genius, it's the age. He said he'll return at the end of the age, not that generation. Y'all bring up the arguments about the Amalekites.
Hey, Steve?
Why did they,
Steve?
God tell them to be killed?
Hey, Steve?
Yeah.
Instead of telling me about all the other arguments that other atheists have presented, I mean, you're trying to make a case for atheist doctrine, just make it.
What I'm saying is, your doctrine disses a letter that's 2,000 years old, just like the Jewish people do or the Mormons do. If y'all were really atheists, you wouldn't even care about the Bible. Like you bring it up and say God's bad. When you want to talk about God, he's an evil God, or else there's no God. I wish y'all make up your mind. You're either anti-God or you don't care.
Are you saying that if somebody came to me and said that Darth Vader was a good person, that I shouldn't care? That it would be somehow invalid for me to say, look, this character's fictional, and if it were real, I would disagree with its positions?
Well, the reason you think he's fictional is because you talk to all these Christians and all they do is praise Jesus and don't study the Word.
No, sir.
No.
No, Steve. I used to be a Christian and was going to be a minister. It's not about talking about this. I didn't begin with an atheist presupposition and then try and prove it all false. Christianity and those people who would argue on its behalf have failed to meet the burden of proof for their claims.
Well, wait. You haven't got the burden of proof from Christians, because Christians, they have their own Bible dogma. The burden of proof is the Bible itself. If you want to be a doctor,
no. Steve,
if you want to be a lawyer, you study law.
Steve, a burden of proof. Wow, a burden of proof defines which position needs to establish that it is actually true. You can't say the burden of proof is the Bible. What you could say is that the thing that satisfies the burden of proof is the Bible, and that would then be an argument, and we could discuss whether or not the Bible satisfies that burden of proof.
Well, I understand. I know the atheist argument is called circular reasoning. You can't use the thing to prove itself. But you have to use the Bible to prove the Bible. There's nothing else that proves it better.
Well, then you're out of gas.
Yeah, you're done.
Well, excuse me?
You're done.
I mean, if you're saying that the only way you can do it is by doing it, by engaging in circular reason, then you're admitting that you can't do it.
No, listen. You can't become a lawyer without reading law books. You can't become a doctor without reading medical books. You can't understand the personality of God without reading the Bible.
Actually, Steve, you couldn't possibly be more wrong. The first doctors didn't read any doctrine books. The first lawyers didn't read any lawyer books. And you haven't demonstrated that reading your Bible book does anything to produce any position that is true.
Okay, so let me end with one summary, and I'll give you the last word, okay?
I tell you what, I'll just take the last word, because you're not going to get to end with a summary, Steve. Sorry. If you're going to call up and say that there's an atheist doctrine and then pretend to argue against arguments that we're not even making, why call the show? The answer to your question, the response to your assertion that if we really didn't believe in God, we wouldn't even care, is nonsense. The fact of the matter is I live in a world where people do believe in this God and do act on its behalf, and it doesn't matter whether or not they're correct, it's still wrong. Your analogy about getting a letter from my dad that I never knew is, I'm sorry, one of the biggest crocks of nonsense ever. Because so what? My mom gives me a letter from a man that I never knew and says, this is from your dad. Doesn't mean a thing to me. I can't be sure that it's from my dad. I'll trust my mom, generally speaking, because I know that I must have had a dad and that she'd probably know him. But I don't give a damn what's in that letter about how he wants me to live my life, because guess whose life it is? It's mine. Now, if my mom were to claim that this letter was from a man who had magical powers and wanted me to live my life a certain way, it still wouldn't matter, and I wouldn't believe her, because she has not met the burden of proof. It's absolutely absurd. There is no atheist doctrine. It isn't as if we've come up with this, we don't believe in this God and Jesus thing, so let's find all these ways to prove it wrong. No, we're sitting here, we're not selling something new, we're not buying what you're selling, and it's because none of you can sell it well. It's because you cannot defend your burden of proof. You cannot provide evidence that what you're saying is true, and you flatly admitted it. Oh, I know your atheist argument. We can't have circular reasoning. The Bible can't be proof of itself, but the Bible has to be proof of itself. Congratulations, you lose. You fail at Logic 101. You're done.
Well, besides which, if the Bible were the evidence of a God, you would think that more people would get the same answer. But, in your argument, you pointed out that the Jews, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Catholics, other, faiths have a different concept of this same God.
Yeah.
And so if your God existed, he would be such a phenomenally poor communicator that in what sense could we ever claim that he's omnipotent? He's not even capable of clearly communicating a message. in a way that everyone couldn't mistake the message, because you've got radically different views of what he's trying to tell people.
Oh, but that's, God's perfect. It's just humans who got it wrong.
Yeah, I know. We're just misinterpreting it. Yeah. But the other thing, I mean, the best evidence against the Bible being evidence of your God or what he wants from us is probably coming from theologians themselves. I mean, Bart Ehrman makes this point when he talks about going from being a fundamentalist Christian to Princeton to get a PhD, and discovering higher criticism for the first time.
Yeah.
And it was an eye-opening experience for him. And so if we're relying on any kind of, let's see, you called it atheist doctrine. I don't think it's atheist doctrine. It's just this whole concept of higher criticism that we're looking at.
Evidence.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, if you want to say that reason and evidence is the atheist doctrine,
Yeah.
guilty. Preach it all day, brother.
Yeah.
Reason and evidence all day long. See, because when I was a believer, I actually had the desire to fulfill my obligation. And since you're so interested in looking up, you know, passages and words, go to 1 Peter 3:15 and dig into it in the original text, and you'll find out that what it's actually talking is that you're to be ready at all times to prevent the reason for the faith that's within you. And the word used there is actually logos, which in that reference isn't just referring back to Jesus, as some apologists might like to say, but it's actually talking about give a logical, non-flat assertion, testimonial, anecdotal evidence for it. Because if, in fact, all you can offer to support the reason why you believe is that because the Bible proves the Bible, you've lost. I mean, it's that simple. But anyway, we got others, and we're running about, well, 14 minutes or so left in the show. We got Bill from Ontario.
Yeah, hi, Matt?
Sure. I apologize for the echo. Get your statement out, and I'll put you on hold.
Yeah, so I've noticed that believers, what they tend to do is when I say, well, I'm not sure, or I don't know the answer to that, they're like, aha, so you're wrong then. And then instantly they assume, because I don't know for 100% certainty, they think that they must be right, and they trump me.
Yeah, Ray Comfort does that religiously.
Yeah.
That is Ray Comfort's religion, I'm convinced. In addition to Christianity, he holds this religion of, look, you don't know. And by the way, when you do assert that you know something, and you're talking about it in the sense that we have gained some scientific knowledge, and when you're really just saying we have a good understanding of this, he'll try to get you to admit that you don't know. The whole atheist test thing is, you know, well, if you're not certain there's no God, you're really an agnostic, you're not an atheist.
Yeah.
No, jackass.
Makes
I'm
the
an
same
atheist.
mistake this guy did.
Yeah, it's nonsense.
Yeah, right.
I just called him, oh, that's okay, it's Ray.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's an echo there. Do you have anything else, Bill?
Yeah, well, one thing is recently I talked to my grandfather on my mother's side, and he's very, very religious, you know, set in his beliefs. And recently he kind of figured out that I'm atheist. And, you know, he brought up the whole thing of, well, you can't prove it, and, like, maybe you need to do your research. Yep. And, you know, since I became an atheist, I think I've done more research than back when I was a Christian.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And oddly enough, I hear that from, it was me doing research that led to me becoming an atheist. It's what the same thing with
here.
Jen, and Tracy, and Jeff, and you know, of all these outspoken, supposedly dogmatic theists that or atheists that come from theistic backgrounds, it's all the result of actually doing research. Yeah. It's of actually analyzing the arguments for and the criticisms of the religion that you came from, and then branching out to do the same thing for other religious claims, and then looking at the bigger picture on the whole. What reason do we have to posit the existence of some supernatural being in the first place? How do we even you know, possibly, you know, analyze this?
You really can't.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that all these people who are convinced, they are convinced of something for which they cannot possibly have any evidence.
Right. Yeah, and, okay, so I'll let you guys get on to the next caller. I just wanted to say, though, that I really look up to you guys, and you guys do a great job of what you're doing.
Thanks a lot,
Well,
Bill. I appreciate it.
Yep.
All right, we got Let me get the right line here because I don't think that one's on. Doug in Houston.
Yes, what's going on?
Hey, how you doing?
Hi.
Hey, what's going on? I'm a big fan.
Thanks.
Great, thanks.
It's an honor to be on. I've been listening for about 3 years. I'm an ex-Christian, and as you, Matt, I was probably going to end up being a minister, which leads me to the question. As the Christians like calling us out, saying that we're the fools, I had an epiphany on that. Are we the fools? If there are professionals in theism that could capitalize and make money, it would be us.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about that? I mean, it's
Sure.
a question, moral, but
Do you have any idea how rich I could be right now if I was
Exactly.
unethical?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm the guy who's been hosting an atheist TV show for the last 5 years. All I have to do is claim that Jesus came and spoke to me one night, and the next thing you know, every Christian organization is going to be, I'm going to have book tours and preaching at churches
Yep.
and talking about the atheist delusion and how I hung with the new atheist, the heart. I could turn this, I could be, woo. Unfortunately, I'm way too ethical for that, and I actually give a damn about truth.
yeah.
And so I will continue to be poor, and if that makes me foolish, so be it.
Of course, there are other aspects of Christian doctrine that you'd have issues with, but
Yeah.
you know.
Somebody asked me the other day if I would go preach in a church if they gave me $1 million, and I was like, as long as I can preach whatever I want, sure.
Yeah.
You bet. I'd do it for 50.
Yeah.
Actually, I'd probably give you 50. You give me your congregation for a Sunday morning, let me preach the way I want to, I'll give you $50.
Yeah. Let us teach your kids the Bible stories.
There's a limit. Not everybody can get that because I don't have the $50 to give to 1,000 churches. But the second part of your question that's on here is about, is it possible that there's church leaders that are secretly atheists? It's not only possible, it's
yeah.
a certainty. Dan Dennett has been doing a study on some that are stuck in the ministry. Now, I think you were probably talking more about people who are being intentionally dishonest in order to make a buck.
Yeah.
I think they exist too. I can't name them by name for fear that they would sue me, and they have much more expensive lawyers than I do. But I think that there are people particularly on television, who are knowingly fraudulent in their portrayal of their religious beliefs, and they're doing it in order to make a buck. And I think that they're in a different category from the preachers who are stuck being preachers who happen to no longer believe. We know for certain that they're out there not just because of Dan Dennett, because after we did a show about this, the very next day, a preacher
Yeah.
who watches the program religiously contacted us to say, I am one of those preachers who is stuck preaching. And we've carried on some conversations with him
Yeah.
and hope to have him call into the show sometime.
Well, I had one other question I'll hang up.
Sure.
I was always curious about because I'm a newbie at this, being an atheist and all, and I've done a lot of research, as the last caller stated. And I recently did a lot of reading and listening to Madeline O'Hare.
Yeah.
Madeline O'Hare.
Yeah.
And being that she was out of Austin, I was curious to is some of her movement led to the Atheist Experience, or
Sure.
how much attributed to her is her? Because I think she was a great speaker and a great philosopher, thinker, which I was raised to believe she was totally demonized by my family. But
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hang up, Doug, so you don't get the echo,
you.
but I'll answer it. Thanks. I'm right there with you. I remember when I was a kid, I saw Madeline Murray O'Hare on Phil Donahue's show. Had no idea what was going on, but my mom changed the channel really quick, and there were a couple of quick discussions about how she was an evil atheist woman trying to destroy God's country, etc. And I didn't know much more about that, and I really didn't think I needed to. I mean, Mom had told me, so it was good enough. Yeah, American Atheists, the organization that she founded, was originally here in Austin. Madeline did have a public access TV show. Some of the people in the ACA actually worked with her on that show. The organization moved to New Jersey. The ACA was formed not with any ties to American Atheists or Madeline's group. It was a newspaper article
Yeah.
that was sent out, and people started meeting in a coffee shop. This was after the Austin-based American Atheists had moved. This is about 13 years ago that the ACA started.
In fact, it was after Madeline's death.
Yes.
So.
And the new this organization, the Atheist Community of Austin, was formed, and they, obviously American Atheists continued to exist, and they're based out of New Jersey now. It's completely separate, but there are members of the ACA who were around and active when Madeline was running American Atheist here. I never got a chance to meet her. She was dead long before I was even an atheist. I've seen the footage that I wasn't allowed to watch previously, and I've read some things that she wrote, and I think I love her, and I think she and I would have had a lot of fun, but unfortunately, she's dead, and we would have disagreed on quite a few things though too, but that happens all the time. It's one of the beautiful things. I mean, there's a handful of people here in the studio today. Most of them are ACA members or new members or stuff like that. Well, the number of disagreements that happen between ACA members on all kinds of subjects is impressive. And one of the nice things is that most of these people I count among my best friends, and we can have incredibly heated, sometimes even hostile arguments between ourselves, and okay, next. Because we're not attacking each other. And even if I say, oh, that's stupid, or you're stupid, or whatever else, you give as good as you get. And it's this understanding that, just because I don't agree with you on this thing doesn't mean I think you're a piece of crap and you're useless and you're no part of my world and you shouldn't be in my presence. You are beneath me. And that's not the way that discussions like this go with theists. And one shining example of this. I don't want to go down this trail because we don't have enough time. There's only like a minute and a half left before we got to sign off. I will get to this last call, though, so Mosh, stay on. I posted something about skepticism and atheism the other day on the blog. And I divided the skeptics up into 3 different categories in order to address this issue, which I won't go into great detail on. The blog post is there. You can read it, atheistexperience.blogspot.com. And I divided it into 3 categories of skeptics. Category number 1 is the least trouble skeptic, and that's the person who believes that skepticism supports their theistic position. Category number 2 I call the Pamela Gay skeptic, and that is somebody who is a skeptic and is a theist and thinks that skepticism has nothing to say about their theistic beliefs because they're untestable. And then the skeptic category number 3 was the Martin Gardner skeptic, and this is skeptical theists. Someone who's a skeptic who believes in God but acknowledges that they're not using skepticism when it comes to their God belief, not because it doesn't apply, but because they don't want to, because there's some emotional argument for it. That's all I wrote. Somebody posted a reply that said, how could you launch such a vicious attack against Martin Gardner? Now, I didn't. I stated the man's position. There was no attack, vicious or otherwise. But this other person who is a skeptic and is an atheist, who looks up to and admires Martin Gardner, and now we're not going to get to that call, I apologize. I'll take it after the show's over, felt a personal affront because I had exposed a flaw in an idol. And this forced them to acknowledge that on this subject, they weren't being very skeptical. They were revering someone and putting them above criticism. And acknowledging your own failure to be skeptical is very uncomfortable. That's getting to the core of who you are. And so it felt like an attack, when I had not even said anything remotely unkind. I had simply put labels on the different positions. That's what happens in the conversations with theists, etc. The credits are up. We are completely out of time. I apologize. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll continue to work on the audio problems. There will be a show next week and the week after, but then no show on the 22nd.